Hi, I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Here at FX Medicine, we strive to remain clinically relevant. So stay in touch with us and please let us know how we're doing. We love hearing from you. You can email info@fxmedicine.com.au or contact us via Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us on the line today is Annalies Corse, who's a medical scientist, lecturer, naturopath and author based in Sydney. She's worked as a medical scientist at Charles Sturt University, the Australian Institute of Sport, Australian Biologics and both public and private hospital pathology laboratories. Annalies has been a practising naturopath and lecturer since 2008. She lectures in human biochemistry and the medical sciences for ACNT and SSNT, as well as conference and seminar presenting for fellow health professionals. Annalies is a past board member of the NHAA and is on the scientific advisory board of the Mind Foundation. Most recently, Annalies has contributed to Leah Heckman's textbook called Clinical Naturopathic Medicine, due for publication in 2018. And I warmly welcome you back to FX Medicine, Annalies. How are you?
I'm really well, Andrew. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, today we're going to be talking about something which I've got to say I went care when I first heard it, and that's the fourth trimester of pregnancy.
Yes.
What is the fourth trimester?
Oh, it's that thing that nobody tells you about when you're pregnant. That's what it is. And it's that trimester that most obstetricians say lasts about 6 weeks and then you get a checkup. But in reality, it's roughly about 12 months, if not more, after a baby is born. And it also affects people that didn't birth the baby. So it affects fathers. It affects, say, a same-sex couple, and it might be the female that didn't birth the baby. It might be the mother that didn't birth the baby but needed a surrogate, or it might be the older siblings of a new baby. So it's everyone in that immediate family unit.
You know, like I've been to antenatal classes. The mother's had a bubby. Congratulations on your newborn bubby. Now see you later. Why is there no postnatal care? And I should qualify this. I have actually met a couple of people that said in their area there was postnatal care, but it certainly isn't mainstream.
It is not mainstream, and if you are lucky enough to have, say, a GP clinic or a naturopathy practice or a natural healthcare practitioner, even a doula or a midwife that focuses on this, you are in a rare segment of the population. I'm lucky that I'm married to a very orthodox doctor, and I've got a lot of very orthodox doctor friends. And when I asked them about this after I had a child and said, why, their main reason was, well, there were two. They said there's a limited healthcare dollar.
Cost, yeah.
And the main other reason for this is that there's this attitude that people should be able to look after themselves with regard to their own nutrition, getting family support after a baby is born. And for them clinically in primary medical care, there are competing clinical priorities. So obviously the baby is incredibly vulnerable, so that's a clinical priority. If the mother has postnatal depression, that's a clinical priority. But this whole idea of other things maybe not going quite so right in that 12 months after a baby's born, it's probably not thought of as a huge clinical problem. And I've also found out that it's not really considered as part of medical education. Unless you go off and do obstetrics or GP training, it's really not brought up in many other specialisations.
That seems a little bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul to me.
Yeah, look, it's a spectrum. That's the thing, and there's a spectrum of issues that people face when they have a child. And I guess modern medicine is still treating the very end point of that spectrum, which is things like postnatal depression. There's a huge amount of grey in here, and really the only people that are going to do something about it are those couples or parents that are proactive, or particularly if a GP finds that there's something going on, it'll be a referral to maybe an allied health professional. But it's really, I think that there's a huge amount of investment, not just in the healthcare dollar, but just in terms of, from an ethical point of view, a compassionate point of view, that there is a lot going on in this fourth trimester that has huge effects and huge sequelae for that family and potential health consequences later on in life if it's not dealt with at this particular time. It's such a vulnerable time. There's a huge amount of physiological vulnerability. Your health deteriorates in a lot of cases, and if you're not on top of it and you're not able to be on top of it and the resources aren't there to keep you on top of it, things can go really, really badly for people in this phase.
I've got to just talk about my own experiences with my wife. And, even Lee, when I remember we came home with Aiden and Aiden was fussing at the breast when he was feeding and things like that. Lee had a cracked nipple. And so there's this added stress, this concern about, am I doing something wrong? Am I not doing something right? Have I not gotten the hang of something? Because everything was rosy in the hospital. There was the support around you and everybody went, no, this is how you do it. But there was no demonstration of competency, if you like, from the early days to the later days of feeding and routine and all of that sort of thing. And I can still remember Lee being at the end of her tether in tears. We had to get a lactation consultant to come around. And I vaguely remember Lee having a night off. She just had a couple of nights in a place where there was care for her. Now, we were very lucky to access that.
I know, and I guess in the old days, we probably had people around us, they were, particularly for the females, maybe not so much for the males, but females had so much more support, and not necessarily from the medical profession, but they would have had aunts, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and they would have had a village around them.
And we've lost
We've lost it. And I saw this most beautiful artwork recently, and it was a drawing of a woman in her bed with her newborn. And there were a lot of, maybe 5 different sets of women's hands. And one was covering her with a blanket, one was providing her with food, one was bringing her a drink. And I looked at it and I thought, no, what? What is this? This is not... Nobody has this, really. Maybe in hospital because you've got midwives around you, but certainly not when you get home. You'll be lucky to have your mother visit in most cases. You'd be lucky to have a friend pop by in some instances. I mean, everybody's situation is different, but I guess what I'm talking about is for those people that don't have the support. That's when this fourth trimester, this vulnerable phase, can really create a lot of havoc.
Are there any stats on how many mothers feel isolated in the early fourth trimester?
Look, I don't know a quantifiable stat, but I know from a lot of the qualitative research out there, when qualitative researchers research and look into surveys with mothers and questionnaires, the majority are dissatisfied with postnatal services, and in particular with regard to nutrition, in particular with regard to breastfeeding, and in particular with regard to regaining health, if you like, regaining, what's normal, what's the normal path for getting back to where I was? And if I'm not getting back to where I was, does that mean that there's a problem? And I think the other big problem is there's so much focus, particularly for her, on the baby and wanting to know, is what my baby is doing normal? And these days we have the internet to turn to, which our foremothers wouldn't have had. And that opens a whole can of worms as well, because you start reading forums and you start reading opinion pieces from everybody.
Everybody. Yeah.
And in the end, it's probably just best to not look at anything and just get back in tune with your own self, your own intuition, getting rid of all that distraction that's there and just focusing back in on what's in front of you, the baby, trying to read its cues. And there's a whole lot of intuition that comes into this. And sometimes the best advice people give you is not, well, here's a routine that I did, try this. It's more of a, well, maybe you just need to, you'll find your own way. You will find your own way. Listen to what you think is best. And this is starting to happen a little bit more, I think, than, say, in the decades early, where it was all about, well, this way is the best method.
Yeah.
It's the baby wearing method. This method is the best method. I think we're getting away from that a bit more now. Yeah.
What about things like the ease of travel, and so therefore the distance of the new parents from their parents? That, you know, kids move away from home and they go and start a life somewhere else.
That's right.
Not the least of which is, you know, because of access to work and you know, finance and things like that. But what about our expectations about the extended family? Have they majorly changed?
Yeah, look, I think they have changed a lot. The village really doesn't exist as much as it used to, particularly on the family plane. And that's usually because, like you said, we do move away. We are far more globalised than we used to be. Our village might be on the other side of the world in a FaceTime call or a Skype session these days. And it's fantastic that we have that technology. But I think it gets back to the fact that most of us are having children a little bit older, very much so in westernised countries. So therefore that makes the grandparents older. They may have their own health issues or they're just not as energetic as they were when they were, say, in their 40s or 50s, and they're not able to assume the role that they maybe want to assume. They may want that, but they just can't do that because of their own health issues and their age and their distance away from you. So the grandparents are no longer youngish. I think the other thing with the double income, no kids, because that's what the majority of us in Australia were before we became parents. We're highly independent, and there's this huge, problem in asking for help. It's still seen as a sign of weakness to ask for help. So because you were in this professional background, you were highly competent, and then all of a sudden you've given birth to a baby, and you have absolutely no idea what's right, what's wrong. And then to actually go and ask for help, you may have never asked for help ever because you're just so used to achieving, producing and being the fixer at work, depending on what your role was and the type of profession you were in. I really find that people just don't want to look weak. And so the village might be there in some way, but it may not be getting access as much as we would like it there for us.
Yeah. There are significant stresses on the male. The pressure to be the breadwinner when mum's at home looking after the baby, and there's the expectations of financial and success, and we don't know what to do. We're looking at this baby going, man, you've come in between me and my wife.
Well, I think for males, like a lot of the fathers that I've spoken to say things like, I don't know how I can help. I want to be helpful, but I don't know. I mean, they can't breastfeed. They can't, and there's a lot of things that physically the father just can't do because the physiology of the mother is that the mother feeds the baby. So the other thing is, I truly feel very passionate about this, is that the male and the father is just as important in all of this as the mother. So this fourth trimester idea absolutely includes the father, and it includes their physical, their nutritional and their mental health. There is some there are some studies and reports coming out in the literature about postnatal depression affecting fathers, that it's not just a female thing. And that's obviously not necessarily related to hormone fluctuations and these sorts of things, but, you know, the psychological transition to becoming a parent. So it's something that I think as we go further into the future, I think the men's health for new fathers, or any father, whether it's his second, third or fourth child, is probably going to become more of a focus, and I think that that's really, really important. Fathers, so many fathers that I know, modern day fathers, are helping out. They're getting up with the feeds in the night. They're giving their wife or their partner a night off and doing the feeds, and then they're showing up at work the next day expected to do a massive presentation or expected to work a back-to-back shift, or, you know, they're working really, really hard, and they're sleep deprived as well. That puts stress on their immune system. It puts stress on their HPA axis in terms of, you know, physiological stress. They have a lack of recreation time as well, because, you know, they really want to give their wife recreation time because she might be at home with the children more so than he is, and so he's losing a lot of his hobbies. And then there's worry there as well. So it's not just the mothers. You know, there's a big area of men's health that I think opens up when they become fathers. It's interesting because I think because of the way the whole topic about mental health is starting to open up via other avenues like Are You OK Day and Beyond Blue and men's health initiatives, I think that the trickle-down effect is probably going to be absorbed by programs that are for new fathers. One came up a few years ago. I don't know if it's still running, but it started here in Sydney, and it was called Beer and Bubs at the Pub. And it was about a bit like a mother's group, but it was for fathers. Yeah. And they obviously didn't take the children, but it was just about getting together with other fathers at the pub. So in an environment that they might feel a little bit more comfortable in, something that they might actually go to, and they're starting to connect with other fathers and make new friends, and they're getting some recreation time in there, which is good. You know, as long as they're not drinking to excess, but all of these things can be really beneficial.
So how can we look after ourselves physically, though, with regards to, you know, you mentioned, you know, the shift work and the helping and things like that. I remember that Lee and I eventually got down to a really good routine because Lee's a morning person and I'm a night owl. And so I would do the late night feeds and things like that. Lee would get some rest there, and Lee was quite happy to wake up in the early hours of the morning when I am dead on my feet. And that worked for us, but it's never a perfect handover.
No, of course not. It's never perfect. And the other thing is you can talk about this before the baby comes along, but that whole idea of what you're going to do can be completely changed and turned on its head when the baby's born. So it's a matter of working out, and you may not get into a routine for many months. Those first few months are beautiful, but they're also horrendous, let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Because because for the first few weeks, if the mother's breastfeeding, it takes a long time to establish breastfeeding. And I have always, this is what, from my own experience I've got one little boy, I just found that it took a long time to establish a routine, and the routines that were sort of being prescribed by, say, midwives or whatever, I couldn't, the more I tried to force our life into that routine, the more upset I became and the more stressed I became. So when I decided that I was just going to let our family situation dictate our own routine, things got better. So I think that's really, really important advice for any new family, whether they've only got one baby or it's a new baby, a sibling or whatever. Really sitting down and looking at where, like you did, the areas that you find are easier to cope with, you absorb that. It might be different for your partner. I was I'm not a morning person, but my husband is. So he sort of did more of the work in the morning and I had to sleep in,
Yeah.
whereas I sort of did more at night. I also demand fed my son for the first 12 months. So I'd get up a lot during the night because I could cope with that. My husband was off at work the whole time. So I felt better that he wasn't waking up during the night so he could go off to work, and I sort of felt better about him being off at work and coping that way because I knew he'd got some sleep, whereas the next day I could sort of take it easy a little bit more and just not do too much or not expend too much energy the next day if I'd had a big night with my son the night before. So communication is really important between the couple, working out what are your areas that you think you can cope with.
Yeah.
Teamwork is so important. But then outside of that, it's working on, well, we can't do everything on our own. Most of the time you are. 90% of the time your village is you and your partner. Sometimes it's a single parent situation and your village is you and that's it, and that's very, very hard.
Very hard.
But it's just a matter of realising what the priorities are. Your health is a priority. I mean, I'm talking from the perspective of being a naturopath, but not everyone that's in this situation is going to be thinking about their health, let's be honest. They're just going to be putting their head down and, getting on with it. But you can't get on with it if you're not healthy. So I guess the whole reason that I'm talking about this is because I think there's a need. There's a need to help people with their health in this phase. And whether it's nutritional intervention, whether it's lifestyle intervention, whether it's mental health, psychological, emotional intervention, all of these things can help. And if things are going badly for you, whether you're the father or the mother or whatever it is, if things are going badly for you and you're finding it hard to cope, you tell your partner. You basically say, look, it's almost like you need to treat it like you would an employment situation, and it takes all the romance out of it, but you sort of need to sit down and communicate and say, well, here's the problem. How do we rectify this? What things can we put in place for this to change? And you might identify that your diet is crazy and going out the window, or I just need an hour twice a week to get out for a run. That would really help me. And just telling your partner the things that you need in order to maintain some semblance of health and sanity. Exactly.
So when we're talking about looking after ourselves physically, I've got to ask you, you mentioned demand feeding. How did you find you got enough rest with that? Were you able to have the feed and then drift back to sleep, or did you find that you're wired after that feed for a little while? Did you find that you'd wake up and do other housework? How did you get enough rest to actually look after yourself physically?
Yeah. Look, for me, my situation, and it might be different for other people that demand feed, but my situation was that it was easier for me to get up and demand feed than try to do it to a routine. And I sort of found that I was tired enough and exhausted enough that I'd probably get back to sleep within 20 minutes after feeding. And usually it was the older he got, the shorter the feeds became. And that's generally what happens, as we all know, with babies anyway. I guess what I found was it was the next day, having a rough night with demand feeding didn't sort of affect me too much at night. I could get back to sleep. But if I'd spent a lot of time awake, the next day I really didn't have a lot of energy. So I may not have the energy to, say, go and meet up with another mother that I'd met through Mother's Group, or I might have just been too tired to do something. And where I found it hard was in that what happens the next day or that week during the day, because I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the energy for social interactions, and I found that whole year quite socially isolating, because for me in my head I thought, well, I need to conserve energy. I need to eat properly. I don't have a lot of time. In order to eat properly, I'm going to spend most of my time making sure I eat properly, and that may have meant foregoing social interaction, which for me, I found the hardest,
Yeah.
to be honest, after becoming a parent, the social isolation for me, because a lot of my friends don't have children. They're still working
Right.
and they haven't had kids yet.
Yep.
So the next day, I always found that harder than the nighttime stuff. But the only way that I could deal with it was buffering that with a sound, the sound basis of nutrition. And like I said, everyone's situation is so different. So, I can be talking about what I did, and there might be some similarities out there, and not everyone has the same experience. So it's always hard to give out this advice for new parents when they're going to forge their own way. But nutrition is a big one, and definitely herbal medicines can make a difference as well, a big difference for the male and also for the father, for the mother in the relationship, because as we know, herbal medicines have a great influence on stress, the immune system, and they are medicine. So if something's coming up, we can use herbs. I guess the only thing is for the female, if she's breastfeeding, you have to be careful about alcoholic extracts and just focus on other ways like recipes and teas, and not going down that path of alcohol tinctures or decoctions.
One of the things that I think surprises a lot of practitioners is there's a lot more safety data on herbs in pregnancy than there is for herbs in breastfeeding.
Yes.
And it's a real conundrum here. It doesn't matter about the
conundrum.
tradition. It matters also about the medico-legal aspects of treatment. So it's kind of like, well, where do you lean here? I've got to say, I lean very heavily on Kerry Bone's Herbal Safety book.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe it's very comprehensive. I think it's one of the masterpieces of practice. I think every practitioner who wants to practice herbal medicine should get that book at the very least.
Absolutely. And always erring on the side of caution and always safety first. So if you're not sure about alcohol and ethanol or a particular type of herb for whatever reason, don't do it. There are other ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Use a tea. Use that food if it's more of a culinary type food. We're lucky with the pregnancy stuff in that so many of the galactagogues are culinary.
Yes.
So you can come up with recipes. They may not be the nicest thing out there. You might be, making some kind of a edible poultice. So I call them edible poultices because they're like a bit of a paste. And you're just sort of putting it into your mouth like a paste. But it's a way of getting it in, but you don't have to worry about ethanol content. So your prescription is often a bit of a potion recipe that they can make up in their kitchen within 5 minutes. It's not something that, you're asking them to make almond milk over a week and they say, I can't do that, I'm too busy looking after my baby.
Yep.
You say, well, this takes 5 minutes. You can make it, keep it in the fridge and have a teaspoon twice a day.
What about things like, for instance, with mastitis? There's the good old, cold white cabbage leaves. There's, various probiotics now for mastitis, indeed.
Yes.
What about things like, dysphoric milk ejection reflex? What about certain, let's say, call them functional foods to aid in lactation? What sort of things do you employ?
Okay. Well, first of all, with mastitis, I think frequent feeding helps. That complete emptying of the breast, the correct technique, the attachment of the baby, that is all crucial. On top of that, things that lead to mastitis include things like the unique anatomy of that woman's breast, sometimes physiological or pathophysiological determinants. She might have had a really poor immune system before she became pregnant. Yeah. And I find that women who have a history of immunocompromise are far more likely to develop mastitis, chronic mastitis. It may even lead to things like antibiotic use or stopping breastfeeding for that reason. So if there's anyone with mastitis, you might be experiencing a little bit of it in those early days as you establish breastfeeding. And if that's the case, definitely get a lactation consultant appointment and go and see one, because if you get a good lactation consultant, the advice they give you is invaluable. And you probably find that you're breastfeeding for 2 years, if you want to, after establishing a good breastfeeding regime with a lactation consultant. The cabbage leaves and some of the more traditional methods are for, topical relief, they're for pain relief. They help, but they're not going to be treating the underlying cause, as we know. There's also, with mastitis, there are deficiencies associated with this. So vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, selenium and zinc, these are all linked to, or they're renowned for causing mastitis. And this might sound a bit funny, but in the dairy industry, mastitis is a huge problem, and they actually supplement the feed of lactating cows with these supplements because they know what a huge problem mastitis is.
Yep.
And I know we're talking about cows here, but
sometimes
we need to look at other species of mammals and think, well, what are they doing in the veterinary world? What are they doing in the farming world in terms of nutrition, and how can we apply that to, say, human mammals? So, A, E, selenium, and zinc deficiencies, and D is the big one.
And if you're talking about dairy production, you're talking about, the massive dairy production of Illawarra Reds or Friesians or something like that.
Yeah, they're all being supplemented. So the other thing is I also think demand feeding. I am a huge proponent of demand feeding, but I also completely appreciate that not every woman can do this because she might go back to work soon or for whatever reason. But there is so much evidence that as we are human mammals, and mammals are either spaced feeders or continual feeders. So spaced feeders are the mammals that they cache their young away in a nest, like rabbits and burrows, animals that have their young in burrows, and they go off and forage for the whole day. And their breast milk is really, really high in fat. And they've evolved that way because they're away from their young for such a long time, whereas human mammals are continual feeders. So we're apes. And we only have to look at other apes to see where we've come from. The baby is pretty much hanging on to mum constantly. And they'll just access the breast whenever they feel like it. And continual feeders like humans have more dilute, less calorie-rich, 3 to 4% fat milk because we are supposed to be feeding them continually. So for me, when I read about demand feeding and I sort of threw the whole feed at 1 a.m., 5 a.m., 9 a.m., threw that routine out the window. I'm sorry to the beautiful midwife who suggested that to me. She was lovely, but I just couldn't do it. For me, the evidence is in our milk, and we are continual feeding mammals. And if we can adopt that, if we're willing to do it, it's not easy. I absolutely empathise with women who maybe don't like breastfeeding, can't breastfeed, need to go back to work. But if you're in the position to demand feed, it helps immeasurably with preventing mastitis. So it's good for the mother, but it's also very, very good for the baby as well. And it helps with all things like colic and diarrhea and flatulence and settling and bonding and keeping your oxytocin levels high, etc.
Yeah.
So,
any work been done on a microbiota with, demand feeding versus formula feeding over a longer time rather than shorter time?
Well, most of the data really hasn't looked at demand feeding versus timed routine feeding.
Right.
Most of the data around microbiota is still around C-section babies versus naturally birthed babies, which everyone sort of knows about that. But not a lot of studies on demand versus routine. And that would be definitely an interesting PhD for someone if they're interested in breastfeeding and interested in the microbiome, because that's our natural evolutionary practice. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what the microbiome of babies fed that way is at certain time points over a lifetime. Absolutely.
There we go. Martin Blazer, if you wouldn't mind being the professor on this one, that'd be lovely.
We need some supervisors and some students getting onto this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Annalies, what about scope of practice here? How are naturopaths placed for looking after couples, indeed, I would say now family units in the fourth trimester?
perfectly placed. This is something that I believe in, and this is why I talk about this topic a lot since having a little boy, because naturopaths and nutritionists, holistically trained professionals who use herbal medicine, nutritional medicine, are perfectly placed to fill this hole. There is a gap in I don't want to say the market because it's not a market. There is a gap in humanity. There's a gap in medical practice.
Yeah.
There is a need, and it's not being filled by the medical profession for many reasons, and it's not intentional. They're busy doing other things, or for whatever reason. They also don't have the training that we have. They don't have the training in nutrition and herbal medicine. We are the perfect profession to be filling this need. And you don't need extra training in postnatal health protocols per se. It's obviously good to do your reading and attend seminars, but really it's just about looking at the couple in front of you and think, okay, well, here's a mum, here's a dad. Tell me what your issues are and just start supporting them. In an ideal world, I would love to see someday in every GP practice a naturopath and a nutritionist focusing on fourth trimester services for new parents. That's what, if I could get that happening, that would be the perfect thing, and make it part of primary care. And the thing is, even though I'm saying there's a need, there are naturopaths who are already doing this already. You know, they've geared their practice towards this. There's a lovely colleague of mine here in Sydney who's doing this. Two of them actually. One's a naturopath, one's a naturopath doula. They're doing amazing things with this, but they can't help everybody. There's only one of them.
And geographical limitations. Yeah,
exactly. So it is a need, and I think we are the profession to go out and do it. But it's a matter of communicating with the medical profession. Yeah. And them getting to know us personally, not just necessarily as a profession or as an industry, but personally, getting to know the local naturopath, meeting them, having a coffee with them, explaining what you do, showing them that you are safe. Okay? I think that's the thing. We need to start building some bridges.
Where can naturopaths go for further resources to become educated, proficient, and, as you say, safe in the fourth trimester?
I think there's a number of different things that naturopaths and nutritionists can be doing. The first thing is having the confidence to almost to just do it. If you're not confident in this, I would start looking at resources that speak about how to treat thyroid function, because thyroid function is something that is a little bit problematic for women after they have a child. So I'm just sort of thinking about clinical scenarios that might require a little bit of extra study. Yep. So if you feel you need to do more work around thyroid imbalance before you start offering services in this area, go and do a bit more training and seminars in that particular area. Go and do more training in, if you feel that your practice is particularly strong in the nutritional realm and you would know what to suggest nutritionally and with herbs, go and do some more work around possibly emotional issues, mental health issues, because that's a lot of what you're going to be treating. If you think your practice needs a little bit more of a scope around people that work in this area a lot, try and meet with midwives or doulas or any other naturopaths that you know that are working in this area already, and see if you can get some kind of mentorship happening with them, because they're the people that can help you with things like coming up with a clinical questionnaire that you can use in your clinic for how to identify clinical issues that are coming up in the practice. Unfortunately, there's not really a lot of books that I can recommend for people on this particular issue. There are seminars out there on, what to eat for breastfeeding. They're fantastic. Anything that you can find in terms of seminars, CPE articles about, galactagogues and what to eat for enhancing breast milk production, that's all fantastic. But actual books, they really aren't in, there's no real sort of textbook on this. There are textbooks out there that are more midwifery type basis, and I think they're good. They're good because you can get some good insight into how the medical profession deal with this and some of the more, I guess, critical issues that can come up in the fourth trimester. So how to screen for postnatal depression, how to screen for thyroid issues, the types of blood tests that you might want to order. So I wouldn't discount even just going and buying or borrowing a midwifery textbook that deals with the first 6 weeks postpartum. That they can be very, very useful as well. The other thing that I would suggest is if you are a parent and you've been through this yourself, you have expertise because you've been through it.
Yeah.
If you're a naturopath or a nutritionist and you're not a parent yet, or you may not want to be a parent but you'd really like to work in this area, don't let that stop you, because you can still work in this area. I've got quite a number of young female students who want to work in this area, but they haven't had their kids yet. And I say to them, don't let that stop you. Don't let that stop you. You just need to get educated and make sure that you've got the right tools in your clinic. So I think top 3 would be trying to get a mentor if you can. Try and do a bit of extra reading and extra seminars about breastfeeding and some of those more medical midwifery concepts that are useful in that period of time. And then just have the confidence to start somewhere and have a referral group around you. Get to know the local GP, get to know doulas, get to know midwives, because it's definitely a team effort, and it's about getting people's clinical experience and absorbing that into something that you can offer.
Annalies, thank you so much for taking us through that. It's obvious that you come from a point of expertise from your own experiences, and you're now sharing this for the betterment of the patients that you see. So I truly thank you for taking us through the fourth trimester today on FX Medicine. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks again.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. The Bioceuticals Integrative Medicine Awards showcase the outstanding talent we have in the Australian complementary medicine profession. Nominations are now open for the 2018 BEMA Awards. For more information and to book your ticket to the gala dinner, visit bioceuticals.com.au/BIMA.